that looks at our museum and our collection from the perspective of light in all its beautiful physical and spiritual dimensions and associations. May I ask who of you has been to the museum before? If you want to raise your hands, let me know. I'm standing here at the virtual entrance because that is where I would be when I would normally welcome you to the museum. And any one of you who has already been there will know that our museum really is so wonderfully light. It is designed in a way that really maximizes light at every time of the year, and of course in the winter in particular. This is a crucial element for us to survive. So the museum, as you know, was opened in September 2014. Its patron is His Highness the Aga Khan, who is the spiritual leader of the world's Shia Ismaili Muslims. And in designing the architectural space for the museum, he worked with a Pritzker Prize winning architect from Japan called Fumihiko Maki. And the focus of their discussions for this museum revolved around the centrality of light. Light in the physical and spiritual sense, because His Highness wanted a museum and a building where everyone would feel welcome and would feel that they have entered a place where the light of the divine or the light of the universe and of the reality around us comes together with human enlightenment and light that comes from learning, from understanding, from growing empathy across cultures. So the whole architecture is designed around that, and our central courtyard is a place where really the light comes in very, very beautifully, and it is designed in a way that the light actually through the day moves around the courtyard, and in falling through these beautiful mashrabiyya geometric patterns of the windows actually projects a beautiful shadow onto the walls of the four sides of the atrium, and thereby of course also playing a little bit with the concept of the visible and the invisible, which of course is also a phenomenon of our existence, in that we have things that we see and that we believe we can see, but of course all these things we see may also have hidden and inner meanings. So really a building to set the scene for our theme today, which is light. And I'm going to take you into our permanent collection now around the atrium to say a little bit about our collection. It is a collection of what is called Islamic art, but it is really the material culture that has been created in Muslim majority countries and communities from North Africa all the way to the borders of China and even beyond, between the 7th and the 21st century, because we also now commission and display contemporary artwork. And the important thing to say is that these artworks in turn were not only made by Muslims, were not only made for Muslims, but represent the coming together in many cases of different religions, different cultures in artistic creativity, and also, of course, in intellectual endeavor that has contributed and continues to contribute much to the development of the world at large. So let us get into our permanent gallery, and I'm taking you straight along the corridor. We have around 1,200 objects, of which only ever about 250 are on display at any one time. So now, as we are dealing with Muslim cultures, of course, it is appropriate to start a little bit with the holy book that Muslims believe contain the word of God, the Quran. And we have here in our case a number of Quran pages and also a few manuscripts. And as I'm talking, I just bring up one of these wonderful works, which is a page from a 10th century Quran, probably from North Africa or the Near East, written on parchment in beautiful, majestic Kufic calligraphy. Now, in our context today, the notion of light and the relationship of Muslims to light is a very, very complex one that is in part, of course, also directed by the Quran, which refers to light in many, many different contexts. But most importantly, of course, God is seen as the ultimate light and also the creator of the sun, of the moon, of the stars that give light, but also reflect light. And then it refers to the role of the prophets. And of course, Islam recognizes all the major prophets up to the occurrence of the Prophet Muhammad. So they respect Jesus as the second most important prophet, Abraham, Moses, Noah, all names familiar to us. And all these spiritual figureheads and leaders are understood to be the ones that take humanity from the darkness to the light. But there's also a very, very beautiful verse in the Quran that really refers to light very, very directly. And it goes, Allah is the light of the heavens and the earth. The similitude of this light is as a niche, wherein there is a lamp, and the lamp is in a glass. The glass is as if it were a glittering star, lit from a blessed olive tree, and neither from the east or the west. Light upon light, Allah guides onto this light whom He pleases, and Allah sets forth similitudes for mankind, and Allah is all aware of all things. So a very, very powerful statement with regard to the importance of light as a symbol of guidance and a symbol of the presence of God in reality. Now, ushering you through all the way through the first part of my gallery, I have an object here that very beautifully visualizes what I just told you. At the same time, it also tells us a little bit about the fundamentals or some of the fundamentals of the Muslim faith. What we have here is a tile panel from the later 16th century, from probably Damascus in Syria, and it shows us a niche. And in that niche is a lamp, just as I have just referred you to in the verse from the Quran. So this is the lamp that symbolizes the light of God that is contained within a lamp, within a niche. And of course, in mosques throughout history and to this day, you will find lamps often similar to this one that illuminate the space physically, but also infuse the religious buildings with mystical light, if you like, and remind believers of this connection to divine enlightenment. Now, this lamp here is inscribed with a very interesting inscription in Arabic. It says, Allah, la ilaha illallah, Muhammad Rasulallah. That means God, there's no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. And that is the profession of faith that really forms the first pillar of Islamic belief, and is the foundation stone for how Muslims see the giver, the creator, and the messenger who brought the God's will and God's word to humanity. And beneath this are two little footprints that are quite intriguing in this context, but they refer to the Prophet Muhammad as the leader of the community and also, of course, the imam, the leader in prayer, because niches like these would have been incorporated and still are incorporated in all mosques to indicate the direction towards Mecca, because every Muslim is required to direct their prayer towards Mecca. And the one who leads the community in prayer would also be the one who directly stands either in such a niche or in front of such a niche. And of course, the Prophet would have been the first and the ideal leader of his community. Beneath, there are two further devices of light, two candlesticks at the bottom of the niche. And of course, physically, again, they would have helped to illuminate the mosque and the prayer niche. But at the same time, in a sense, they also reflect from the human perspective, from the earthly perspective, the enlightenment that comes when directing oneself in prayer towards Mecca and in contemplating the light of God. Now, if we go through our collection, and I have to go back a little bit through our gallery, we have many different lampshades in our collection that tell some really fascinating stories. And the oldest one we have is, and I need to navigate closer to it, which is always interesting. Let me just see if I can. Is this little light, this little glass light in the center of the case. Now, this is a very old, it's one of our oldest glass lamps. It probably comes from Syria, dating around the 10th to 12th century, and continuing pre-Islamic shapes for hanging lamps. It is made out of glass, and of course, ancient glass industries were famous in Syria and Palestine and continue in that broader area to this day. And these lamps would have been suspended in all sorts of different contexts, not exclusively religious contexts. And the way that they were used is very interesting, because the little glass body would be filled with water, then a layer of oil, preferably sesame oil, would be floated on top of the water, because the water would support the oil floating. And then a wick would be lowered into the oily layer and lit. So a very, very interesting technique to get the light going. Now, in terms of standing lamps, the earliest piece we have comes from Islamic Spain, from the 10th century. Here we have it on the left. Now, this piece is cast from heavy bronze and a very, very elaborate decoration. That goes back also to pre-Islamic prototypes. And what is fascinating here, that while it was probably used in 10th century Islamic Spain, very, very similar prototypes come from the metalwork of Coptic Christians in Egypt. And indeed, in this period still, the Christian and also the Jewish communities were happily continuing with their artistic and mercantile traditions and expertise under new Muslim governments and rulers. And at that time in particular, we know that the Jewish communities in particular were also involved in trading these objects from Egypt around the Mediterranean, and also already had global networks for repairing their works, for ordering new works. And we know that because of a stash of documents that was found in the late 19th, early 20th century in the old synagogue of Cairo. And in it, there are documents that attest to the fact that already at that time, merchants would send metalwork all the way to workshops in India to be repaired, to be refashioned with very, very clear instructions. You know, for example, take a candlestick like this. It would say, I'm sending you this candlestick. It is broken. It weighs so many grams. Please have it refashioned into a basin. Make sure that the one who does that for you doesn't cheat and doesn't steal any of the metal. Make sure the weight stays the same. And then you can convey it back to Egypt through brother X and brother Y and brother Z. So already indications of globalized collaboration and networks within and beyond communities that were not only Muslim, but that collaborated very successfully across geographies and across differences. Now, moving forward in centuries, another standing type of candlestick comes from Iran, or actually from what is now Afghanistan, from the Herat area of Afghanistan. And this piece is very large, and it is hammered from sheet brass very, very carefully. And it is decorated, if you can see this, let me see if I can get closer, with little sphinxes all around the top of the candlestick. Now, the sphinx is an ancient symbol with solar connections, with symbolic connections to the sun, but also to ideas of the cosmos and to astrological convictions. Of course, it also a little bit has relationships to lions. And it's interesting, of course, that since antiquity and throughout the history of Muslim cultures, the lion was also associated with the sun, because the lion Leo, as a star sign, had the sun as its planet. And in modern times, you would still find, up to the Pahlavi dynasty in Iran, for example, the combination of the lion and the sun as a stately symbol. Within religious contexts, also beyond that, serving as a reference to the cousin and son-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad Ali, who is, of course, the leader of the Shia Muslims, perpetuating the Prophet's message. And his symbol too was a lion, and the symbolic connection with the sun, and again with enlightenment that came through it. Now, moving along further, again in Egypt and Syria, we find shapes not so very dissimilar, but symbolically decorated in a very, very different way. This candlestick comes from Syria or Egypt and was made under the rulership of the Mamluk dynasty. And these Mamluks were originally mercenaries that were brought in and then eventually took over power and identified themselves very, very strongly with the message of Islam and with defending the ethos and the principles of Islam. And the decoration that's chosen here is an inscription that gives the names and the qualities of one of the high-level officials of the ruling Sultan at the time. And it says, the Honorable, High Excellency, the Lordly, the Royal, the Wise, the Diligent, the Just, the Officer of Al-Malik al-Nasir. And the style of calligraphy that is used in this candlestick directly relates to the style of calligraphy that was used in Quranic inscriptions, in religious inscriptions, on contemporary buildings, mosques, but also in Quran manuscripts themselves. And the symbolism is really to make a direct connection between the officials of this government and the principles of Islam. Now, the use of these candlesticks is very fascinating, because from that period we know that they carried candles that were made of the best wax and infused, like our aromatic candles today, with incense, with scented materials, and decorated even with paper decorations or gold and silver fillets. And they served again in palaces and in mosques, but they were also carried around in official state and religious processions through the city of Cairo. And we know from sources that the high officials of the government at the time competed in trying to have the most beautiful and precious candlesticks and the most precious and important candles in it as well. So sometimes it's fascinating over the centuries to find how many human instincts are actually timeless and are still continued today in our own lives in many ways. So moving forward, I wanted to go into the second half of the gallery as we are swiftly moving through, and come to yet another type of candlestick that was popular yet again a couple of centuries later in Iran in the 16th and 17th century. Here we have two examples, very classical examples, and they would have been used either as candlesticks or as torch stands, because we have some examples that have a cover on top through which contained a little oil reservoir, and a flame would have come out of the top of that attachment. But in any case, the design is completely abstract, with either chevrons or with flowers, but most of these have the most beautiful mystical inscriptions that refer to the fact that these candlesticks were not only seen as functional objects, but really also, in a sense, as focus for meditation around some of the yearnings of believers to be united with the divine. So most of these poems that are chosen come from the Iranian mystical poet Saadi, who died in 1291. And one of these candlesticks says, "I remember one night as my eyes wouldn't close, I heard the butterfly tell the candle, I am stricken with love. If I burn, it is but right. But you, why do you weep? Why burn yourself out?" And the poem refers to the butterfly as a metaphor for the believer who draws closer and closer to the flame, to be burned in the flame, i.e. to become one with the divine essence, and in the process abandon all selfishness, abandon in fact the self itself, and become united with the divine. Very, very strong motif in Sufism, which was prevalent and continues to be prevalent in Iran and in many other areas of the Muslim world to this day. In fact, when you might all know the author Rumi, the poet Rumi, Jalaluddin Rumi, who is roughly from the same period originally, but today is the most translated foreign poet in the whole of North America. And then, just to finish us off, I also wanted to show you one of our manuscripts. It's called the Anwar-e Suhaili, the Lights of Canopus. So now this wonderful manuscript was created in Iran in 1593, and it is actually the most precious manuscript that survives of this literary text. And interesting about this text is the fact that it is actually based on a set of Arabic animal fables, the Kalila wa Dimna, and these in turn were based on Indian animal fables, the Panchachantra, which entered the Iranian cultural sphere already in the pre-Islamic period. So in any case, the title, of course, refers to light, Anwar, which is lights, from Nur, light, Anwar Suhaili. But it also has a double meaning, because on the one hand, it refers to the lights of Canopus, which is the brightest star in the southern hemisphere. But in another meaning, it refers or may refer to the wisdom of Suhaili, Amir Suhaili, who was actually the patron of this particular manuscript and this particular version of the text. In any case, the stories, all 107 of them in this text, are actually not for entertainment, but they are a source of enlightenment for rulers. It is a mirror for princes, i.e., it is a learning manual for princes, how to govern wisely, how to be an ethical and just ruler. So it is, in a sense, a professional development manual in so many ways. And the wisdom in this work is conveyed through stories in which the animals represent some of the human qualities and foibles and the pitfalls that arise when the qualities, the good qualities, come up against nastiness and evil intentions or instincts, as it were. So in this manuscript here, in this miniature painting, we see the fable of the lion and the bull. And the story here is that the Lion King has a very, very close friend, the bull. But then the conniving jackal, Dimna, starts whispering in the king's ear that the bull is dangerous, the bull will come to threaten his position, the bull is acting behind his back. So really bad-mouthing the king's good friend, to the extent that the king not only starts having doubts, but also decides that the bull is an active danger to his position and to his life, and then proceeds to preempt the situation and kill his very best friend. And of course, the morale of this story is that, you know, if you have the wrong advisors, if you don't choose wisely who you associate with, you will find yourself in trouble and you will make the wrong decisions. So I would like to stop on this example of, you know, seeking human enlightenment in everything we do and wisdom in everything we do. And I think I open it up for some questions that you might have. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm here for any questions that you